It's Tuesday, July 29th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is the one and only, the man himself, Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy?
What's happening, dude? I am really excited to talk about this episode because I think Dynasty became my favorite type of fantasy probably 5 or 6 years ago, to be honest. I want to be in as many Dynasty leagues as I can. I find it super fun being able to look at your roster all year long. So this is going to be a really good one. I'm curious to know what you think about your team. I know how I feel about mine. I'm going to say it's not my favorite team that I've ever built, but we'll talk about that as we go here.
I am very excited for this episode too. Not just because of I second almost everything Boone just said there, except I try to keep myself limited on Dynasty leagues just so I don't drive myself completely insane, but pretty much second everything that Boone said there. In addition to the fact that I can't wait to find out what kind of not just Dynasty player you are, but also kind of what Dynasty analyst you are as well. So I'm really looking forward to that part of it. If you can't tell, we're breaking down a Dynasty mock draft that we just did recently with sort of the 6 big debates we have coming out of it. But before we dive into that, big news to share with you all. If you've been listening to the podcast, if you've been watching the show, you know that I have been just bashing you over the head with this. We're going to do it here. Again, we have launched a new Yahoo Fantasy YouTube page to give you a one-stop shop for all your fantasy needs. Even bigger news, this podcast, this very show will go live every Sunday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on the very Yahoo Fantasy YouTube page I am referencing, starting August 4th. That is an important date because once it's August 4th, all of our episodes, all of our content are going to be on the new YouTube channel, no longer on the main Yahoo Sports YouTube channel. Stay over there. Keep checking out the great stuff that people are putting up over there, but make sure you're migrating us. We have links to subscribe in the comments and in the captions of every show we're doing. As you know, I will take personal offense if you do not subscribe. So like I said, today, we know, as Boone said, Dynasty leagues are booming. It's crazy. They're becoming so huge in the fantasy industry. So we want to devote an entire podcast to the biggest debates people are having in the space this draft season, especially based on the draft that we just did. For you redraft only people out there, don't worry. I promise you full 100% money back guarantee you are going to get some redraft advice on this too. We're going to be talking about critical players because guess what? The 2 formats, yes, you do stick with your team forever in Dynasty, but winning, finding good players, a lot of overlap there. So Boone, you coordinated yet another amazing group of people for a Dynasty startup. We're going to help kind of use that to sort of visualize things here. So this was a hell of a group you got here, Boone. A lot of great people.
I don't want to pat myself in the back too much here, but this was such a collection of Dynasty minds. I was so excited when these guys all said they wanted to take part. So thank you. Like you see the names on there: Ray Garvin, our buddy, Dwayne McFarland, Danny Kelly, Scott Connor, Andrew Cooper, Ryan McDowell, Scott Belanger, also known as Jax Falcone out there, Chad Parsons, John Daigle, and of course, my friend Pat Fitzmaurice. If there's any of these names on that list that you don't know, definitely go give them a follow. You will become a better fantasy player. And it's like Matt just said, not just for Dynasty, you will become a better fantasy player all across the board here. So I want to say too, as we did the last time we did a mock draft and we had some analysts involved, I want to maybe give a little apology in advance because we are going to talk about some picks that maybe we have some question marks around, but that's the name of the game. Like I've already said here, there's some picks that I made that I'm not too sure about and I might have some regrets. So that's why we go through this. So we can talk about different builds. We can talk about strategy. And then of course we could talk about some of these player outlooks for 2025 and beyond.
All right. So let's dive in here. Like I said, we have 6 kind of Dynasty debates to go over here. The first one's pretty general. So before we dial into what's the best approach in the early rounds of a Dynasty startup, again, especially this one that's super flex, I just kind of want to know, Boone, give me the table set to your approach to Dynasty. Are you somebody that, I always jokingly I don't love to play Dynasty or really analyze it as if it's some stock market. I like to talk about players. I like to talk about guys that I think are going to be good. I love to say hey, this guy might not be good this year, but I love the talent. So keep hanging on. I'm not into sort of the stock trading approach to it all, but are you, and sort of how do you handle playing Dynasty before we kind of get into some of the specifics here?
I don't know that I have one set approach. I normally let the draft kind of come to me and then dictate where my team's going to go. I do think I agree with you that people make the mistake when they think about a dynasty team. They think about their team 10 years down the road or 5 years even down the road. And the more I've played dynasty, the more you realize it's like a 2-year game, maybe 3-year game at most. You should always be focusing on trying to compete in a given year. I did my first ever like complete rebuild a couple years ago. And it took me 1 season. I rebuilt in 1 season. That should be your logic, right? Like, let's sell off the old players. Let's try to make some moves to immediately get back in playoff contention. And that's the other thing that I think people forget about Dynasty is it's like in any fantasy format, you just have to make the playoffs. So you might think this time of year, my team's not as good as some of the other squads out there. And then the season starts and some of your rookies are a little bit better than maybe you even thought they could be, or some other veterans on other teams aren't quite as good. And the next thing you know, you're in the playoffs, you have that chip in a chair. And once you're in, anything could happen from that point on. So I think that's the most important thing. Make a decision early on if you want to go fully into the current season, because that is one approach in dynasty drafts, to definitely just invest in players that are going to be good this year, try to win that first title, and then you get to basically play for free for the next 10 years, depending on what your buy-ins are in that league. Or you do try to build out with some youth that can still be competitive this season, but that in the next 2 or 3 years is really going to hit their stride. That tends to be the approach that I take, where I'm trying to go a little bit younger with my early picks, trying to make sure that I'm locking down. And this ties into this first question that we're going to talk about, what teams do in the first 3 rounds. I normally try to get those young receivers, and in Superflex or 2QB, I'm trying to get those quarterbacks early, because that could be the core of your team. And if you get guys that are young enough, they are going to be on your roster for potentially the next 10 years. And that buys you a ton of time to go out and you can get some older running backs to potentially fill in those spots. And then over the next couple seasons, try to draft some guys that can take over for those veterans. Same thing with tight ends. So that's normally the way I'm approaching it, trying to get those young receivers and trying to get those quarterbacks early, because I think they're the cornerstones of your team and they can really last for a long time in Dynasty if you hit on the right ones.
No question. Yeah. I mean, you can get the right player and just, look, if you took Jamar Chase high in his rookie draft, like, you're just going to have like a high end wide receiver 1 forever if you never want to trade that guy. And, that's when we come to like team building and trades and all that stuff. That's where I sort of hate the idea of like, all right, well, he's at his peak value. Like, should I try to get more assets? Stuff like that's like, man, again, I love just getting players I like and players that score a lot of points. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not here to try to necessarily build some portfolio. And I do think, like, again, this is totally, Boone doesn't have to co-sign this take or anything like that, but it is all about knowing your league. You kind of intimated that when you were talking about it, knowing what other people want to do in your league. It's so much more of a psychological game than redraft is, really, because if you're somebody like me that loves Josh Downs, like maybe I overvalue Josh Downs, like maybe you can fleece me in some Josh Downs level trade, right? Or something like that. Like, you probably know the players I like and sort of where I'm ahead of this, that, and the other. I just don't think there's really, like, we talk about like, oh, the market values this. I just don't really believe in that, because it's like everybody has different opinions of players. There's like trade value charts and things like that people can use. But for the most part, it's like, oh, well, he's worth this on this trade market. Well, okay, well, if the one guy that has Drake London in your league thinks he's like the best receiver in football or something, like, they're probably not going to trade you Drake London for what's a fair trade. So just keep that stuff in mind when we're talking about team building. But let's get into that here a little bit. We're talking about the first debate is what's the best approach in the early rounds of a dynasty startup, and specifically in Superflex. So in our draft here, there definitely was a lot of wide receivers early in the first round, no doubt about it. But there was also obviously a lot of quarterbacks. The first 6 picks, 5 of them were quarterbacks. So when Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson to you, Danny Kelly took a wide receiver, Jamar Chase over Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts. I took Burrow at 5. I felt a little conflicted about that, but I just went ahead and did it because I didn't think I was going to be ahead on a quarterback run later, which I was totally right about. I probably would have hated myself if I didn't have a quarterback in round 2. So I do think obviously we know the 3 elite quarterbacks in redraft obviously are super valuable, but we of course know like these other guys too that are first round picks. Like, you can lock down that QB1 spot for a long time.
Yeah, I was really happy to have one of the top 3 picks because it took all the stress out of that first pick out of my hands. I was just going to take whichever one of those elite quarterbacks was going to fall to me. And in this case, I mean, I got Lamar coming off that season where he had, I believe it was 3 more fantasy points per game, more than any other quarterback. He's, averaged over 20 fantasy points per game for like 7 straight years. It's a pretty easy pick to take there in the first round, and know in a super flex league that you get to rely on having Lamar in your lineup week in and week out. And it's funny because I feel like when I was on this show the last time talking about a redraft mock, that I was preaching, going RB heavy. And I was saying, like, this year especially, I want to have 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. I like my build so much better that way in redraft for 2025. And yet then you come to a dynasty draft and it's like, I almost want to stay away from running backs early. Now, my plan changed a little bit as we went based on the players that were available. But early on, like I was saying, I want to go QB. I want to go receiver. To me, it's not really about running back. If you get one of the young guys who looks like he could have, several years of quality production for you, that's fine. And there's a couple that went in the late first round here in Bijan and Ashton Genty. But really, you can fill your running back spots with some veteran guys. And there are some decent veterans that went very, very late in this draft. I mean, you look at like Christian McCaffrey going in the 6th round, Derrick Henry going in the 8th round. If you load up on those young receivers, if you get yourself a couple good quarterbacks early, and then you turn around and get some of that level of running back later in the draft, your starting lineup is going to look very solid in year 1. I think there's a few teams that did a really good job of that in this one.
Yeah, I don't that's kind of what I wanted to do. I typically, for me in the early rounds of drafts, like I do want to hammer quarterback, wide receiver in a super flex format. No question about it. I came away with 3 receivers that I really love in the first 5 rounds. I went Nico Collins in round 2, then Chris Olave and Emeka Egbuka in the 5th round. So I didn't get my second quarterback until a little bit later, which we can come back to that part of it. But I only went with 1 running back in the first 5 rounds, which is what I typically tend to do. I got Amari and Hampton, and I'm kind of just like, listen, I'll figure out that second round, that second running back spot somewhere along the way. Ended up being James Conner in round 10, which I might only have like maybe 1 to 1.5 more good years left with our guy James Conner here, but I can figure that out next year. Like, let's try to find running backs in the rookie draft. We only drafted 12 rounds, so I only took another running back later, which was Dylan Sampson, look, Dylan Sampson might start for the damn Browns this year. I don't know if you saw this, but Jimmy Haslam, the Browns owner, said he was cautiously optimistic that Quinshon Judkins would play for the team. I'm like, you're caught. Like, I know obviously there's a serious domestic violence situation with him right now, obviously, but it's like, you're cautiously optimistic your second round pick is going to play for you. I mean, that's not glowing, okay? Like all that said to me was Dylan Sampson's going to start games for the Browns this year. So again, that's sort of what I mean by trying to piece that second running back spot together, because there's just so few cornerstones at that position right now. I mean, Ashton Genty, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs went in the top of the second round, but I mean, dude, almost everybody at the running back position, if we're looking even just 2 years down the road, I mean, you just never know what's going to happen at that position.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that you got Hampton in that spot. I considered him in the 3rd round here. But again, because I normally go the other way with my build, I decided, you know what, I'll wait a little bit longer on running back. Turns out I only waited 1 more round before I took a running back, but I got Bucky Irving there, who I thought was a pretty good value. He fell about a round later than where he normally goes in dynasty startups. But I went with Hampton's teammate in Justin Herbert. And man, what like an amazing core the Chargers have in terms of like pretty young talent. Like Herbert's 27. The other guy's even younger than that. And we see Ladd McConkey, we see Herbert, and we see Hampton all go within like 7 picks at that round 2-3 turn. I would have liked to have any of them there. I ended up taking Herbert as my QB2 and really kind of solidifying that position. Now I have 2 quarterbacks that I know are going to be on my roster for a long time. I'm not going to have to worry about arguably the most important position in a super flex league. And then between that, I took Drake London. And I don't know if I've ever heard your take on Drake London, but man, to get a 24-year-old receiver, a guy who's coming off this breakout year, who before last year had terrible quarterback play, and then last year gets decent quarterback play and explodes, right? Has a ton of volume, a ton of production. That season finished 5th among PPR fantasy wideouts. He's behind only Chase, Jefferson, St. Brown, and Brian Thomas. Like, what a year for him. He was 6th in targets per game on the year. And when they turned to Michael Penix at the end of the season for those last 3 games, he was actually tied. London was tied for the number 1 fantasy wideout during those 3 weeks. He was averaging 23.1 PPR fantasy points per game. So I think, again, this is not, guaranteed to happen. This is not even likely. It is a long shot. But I think he's a guy that people aren't talking enough about as somebody that could potentially push for that number 1 receiver spot overall. Like, this guy could lead the league in targets this year. That is not a crazy thing to say in my mind. So again, it's within his range of outcomes. I don't think it's going to happen, but to get a 24-year-old receiver like that in the second round, that solidifies my number 1 receiver spot. I was really happy to have that sandwich of the 2 really good QBs with him in between.
I think we're going to have a section later on the show called The Players with the Best Path to Becoming a First-Round Dynasty Pick in 2026. Drake London is obviously among that group. And
Agreed.
You mentioned, I agree with you. He is my buddy James Coates says this often, that he might have had the quietest near 1,300 yard season in NFL history. And I do think in fairness, some of it is because he just pumped up that final production line in week 18, when obviously most people are not playing fantasy anymore. And it was but listen, the other team on the other side, the Panthers, it's not like they were just calling it quits at that point. Bryce Young also played great in that game. One of the reasons that we're excited about Bryce Young potentially is how he played in that week 18 against the Falcons. In fairness, both those 2 teams, not good defenses. So it was kind of like a wild, shootout between two young quarterbacks. They were playing very aggressive football last year, but still, you don't just get to nearly 1,300 yards because you cut up one team in week 18. The guy was awesome all season long. If Michael Penix is I don't know, 18th best quarterback in the league, he could easily be a consensus first round startup pick in Drake London. Frankly, I don't know, he maybe he should already be there. I think that the fact that he got him or that he went here in the you got him in the late or second round. That's great value, because this is where I think, Boone, people jump the shark with the age stuff. I think basically on most dynasty rankings, Drake London is behind Neighbors, who went in the first round here. He's behind Brian Thomas Jr., who did go in the second round. And I'm very optimistic he's going to come up in that could be a first round pick next year. But he's only 2 years older, is Drake London, than these guys. It's not as if he's all right, well, he's already cooked. And there's every reason to think Drake London could be just as productive as those guys for the next 3 or so years. So yeah, I love your inclusion of him here. He's a great football player, somebody I've been super high on as a very underrated separator, basically since he came into the league out of USC. The guy's awesome, and I love the situation for him this year.
Yeah, and when you look at that offense, Darnell Mooney, a little bit banged up right now. Will he be ready for week 1? I think so, but, he is a little bit hurt, and he's kind of the only other real option. Kyle Pitts has gotten a lot of talk. He's gotten a lot of hype again that he could be involved. Michael Penix even saying,
it's Kyle Pitts. Oh, yeah, it's Kyle Pitts season, baby. This is.
Did you see me throwing the KP out there? We're going to do lots of that this year, right? And then immediately the fantasy world's all right, we're back in. We're doing this again. And I myself still have Pitts on a bunch of teams, so I would like to see that happen. But
same.
You look at that offense, and there's just no one challenging London at the top of that target tree. So he is going to have a fantastic season for sure. I was really happy to get him, but there was a bunch of guys, right? Like I just said, Ladd McConkey, somebody else that in that range. And again, we don't want to spoil talking later about guys that could potentially be first round picks in 2026, but Ladd McConkey, somebody else that I could see rise very quickly this year if he comes out in a similar situation, right? Not having a lot of target competition with the Chargers, could come out and put up an astronomical year based on the kind of volume that he could get. So those were 2 picks, I think, at the end of the second round that, I was happy they were both available to me. I definitely wanted to go with London, but I would have been okay taking either guy.
Yeah, I think when I'm looking at these early rounds too, I am a little conflicted on my approach personally to kind of punt both running back 2 and quarterback 2 in this spot, because I really like the fact that I got Joe Burrow. Really liked where I got Amari and Hampton, and I did want to hammer wide receiver. This is, again, nothing's perfect. You can't build a perfect team in a dynasty startup unless your guys unless Emeka Egbuka comes out and he's the most productive wide receiver on the Bucs, which I think there's a non-0% chance that happens. It's not the most likely scenario, but I think there's a non-0% chance it happens. And it's like, oh, well, guess what? Now this looks like a great team because I've got two really strong wide receivers in Nico Collins and Emeka Egbuka. That's great. Or some of my later round picks really hit, like Tucker Kraft, who I took again in this draft. This was one of those situations where I took Tucker Kraft again, and I was like, you know what? I'm writing up my annual draft day blueprint. I'm like, well, one of my guys obviously is Tucker Kraft because I keep taking him in all these damn drafts. So that's just a good content decision there. He turns into a top 10 tight end. Okay, great. Then the team has outkicked its coverage or whatever. But punting on both running back and quarterback too makes it a little bit like I don't feel great with Bryce Young as my QB2 and Sam Darnold as my QB3, Boone. I'm curious just on your kind of thoughts of like where the cliff comes at quarterback. Because again, there's a chance like Bryce Young, if he plays the way that he did all throughout kind of like from week 10 on last year when the Panthers were a top 15 offense in most efficiency metrics, then he probably is a great quarterback too in Superflex. But you just got to hopefully land on those right spots there to really get the value.
I honestly think the cliff doesn't come until like Geno Smith, and shout out to Chad Parsons in this one. When you're in a group like this, you said it is tough to come away with a team that you're happy with. It's even tougher when you're drafting against this level of manager, right? Like everyone in this league knows what they're doing. There were no real values that are sneaking through. The values that did get through were just kind of barely values. And Chad really took a risk. Like he went QB early. He got Patrick Mahomes. And then he waited all the way until the 9th round and he took Geno Smith. And I think that's actually like a great pick as your second quarterback. If you're able to wait that long and get a player at that level who probably isn't going to have a difference-making fantasy season for you, but can be a totally serviceable starter in that super flex spot. A guy that a few years ago showed us that he could be a top 10 fantasy quarterback. He was the QB 10 in 2022. He's dealt with some things since then, but now he's going to Vegas where he's going to have an up-tempo attack with Chip Kelly. He's going to have some great weapons around him. You have to like what they've been doing with those guys, right? Having Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, who's super underrated as a receiver. He's going to have the weapons and a chance here to potentially put up a decent fantasy season. And when you're getting him in the range that Chad got him in, he doesn't have to be a top 10, top 12 quarterback. If he gives you top 15, top 20 numbers, you're okay because you were able to spend the rest of your early picks on other guys at other positions that are also going to be able to elevate your team, right? So I think that was a really smart move. The one that is fun, and Pat Fitzmaurice took him as his third quarterback, is Anthony Richardson, because Anthony Richardson right now, apparently in training camp, kind of outplaying Daniel Jones so far. It's very, very early, but people seem excited. The beat writers seem excited about him. And we know if Anthony Richardson ever does put this all together, the ceiling there is astronomical. And that's another team where they've surrounded him with some really good weapons. And you mentioned Josh Downs, a guy that we both like. We'll talk about what happened when you took Josh Downs. And I may or may not have messaged you immediately, even though it's a mock draft, because I was a little bit annoyed about that one. But Anthony Richardson, if he puts it all together this season, he would be a guy that should go in the top 5 or 6 rounds, maybe even higher. So taking a shot on him late as your third quarterback, where you don't have to put him in your starting lineup, I thought that was a great pick too. But I'm willing, when I looked at this, it made me question my Herbert pick because some of these quarterbacks fell a little bit later than expected. And I know in analyst drafts, that's going to happen. We talked about that with the mock draft. You see often when analysts are going up against each other, they kind of play that game of chicken where they let the quarterbacks go a little later. Sometimes they even let the tight ends go a little bit later. But we saw some of those guys fall. And I think you got a decent one in Bryce Young too, who showed us in the second half of last season that he could potentially be a decent fantasy quarterback. He can run a little bit. He was doing a little more with his legs than I think anybody expected. And all of a sudden had some good fantasy weeks. If he continues that, and I'm not sure there's any reason to think he's not going to when they go out and get McMillan as a true number one receiver for him, when they bring back a lot of their other pieces, I think Young is going to be just fine and maybe even have a breakout season. And I think this is something too that we should maybe consider with some of these quarterbacks that have new coaches this year. When you think about Caleb Williams and Drake May, who went in the second round and very early in the second round in this draft, some of these teams that have new coaches, it might take a little bit, right? Last year, I think Dave Canales showed up and we had seen what he had done with quarterbacks in other cities. And then he comes to Carolina and everybody goes, oh my God, he's going to do it. He's going to be the QB whisperer. He's going to turn it all around. And it took a while. And for a long stretch there, it didn't look like it was going to turn out. You end up having Andy Dalton come in. And then all of a sudden in the second half of the season, it starts to click. So maybe people should keep that in mind when we're thinking about what these quarterbacks, like, for example, Caleb Williams, like when you see some of these highlights coming out of camp, or lowlights if you want, where he's getting picked off, where he's throwing interceptions and people are getting all over him for it on social media. This is training camp. Like, this is the very early stages of him in a new system. And then today we see reports that he's started to feel more confident and he's starting to look a lot better. That's going to come. So just maybe, throw a little cold water on the people that are excited about Caleb Williams and the people who are worried about it. Just remember that it might not happen in week 1. It might happen in week 4. It might happen in week 8, but I'm pretty confident those 2 picks are going to hit in Drake May and Caleb Williams.
Oh yeah, so am I. And we'll get to the second year quarterbacks actually in our next segment here, but just kind of closing the loop on this one. I think actually, like I said, there's going to be redraft advice like sprinkled into here. I think some of our takeaways from the redraft mock really inform the dynasty one here, which is just, you can, like, in the seasonal league, the value between, like, what do we say, QB 9 to like QB 20 something is pretty flat. Well, that means that, yeah, you can come away with a pretty useful and, like, maybe not great, but maybe useful quarterback 2, quarterback 3 in a Superflex dynasty format like this one. You mentioned some of the just really fascinating QB2 options that went in this draft here. And same thing at the running back position. Like, if you do want to punt running draft, like I said, maybe I don't want to do 2, like both of those every single draft, but I did kind of do it here because there's so much, like, there's some veteran sort of depth in that is getting pushed up in seasonal draft but getting pushed down in dynasty. You can sort of take advantage of that. But let's get to our next big debate here, because you were just talking about Jaden Daniels and Drake May. That is, which sophomore quarterbacks do you want to build around? And Jaden Daniels quite literally went with the first pick in this draft. Our guy Ray Garvin took him first overall. So it's kind of, he's the obvious answer, right? Like,
yeah.
he is the obvious answer of that is the guy there. And then there is sort of a drop off to obviously Drake May and Caleb Williams. A lot of optimism for those guys because they were the first 2 picks in the second round in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, Daniels, like you said, in a tier of his own. This question isn't really about Daniels. I don't think there's any reason to talk about him. We're all super excited about him. In my rankings, I have him just below Josh Allen. He would be my second pick, but if you want to say that's because I'm a Bills fan here, maybe a little bit, but regardless, no one's going to argue with those guys at the top of the draft. So I don't think we need to spend too much time there. Daniels is a fantastic quarterback. He's going to have a great career. The debate is more about the other guys here. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, because Bo Nix basically broke out for fantasy last season, right? He finished as the QB 9 in fantasy points per game. He went at the end of the second round in this one. And then those other guys that I mentioned in Drake May and Caleb Williams, they went at the very, very top of the second round. And I get that. I mean, they're a little bit younger than Nix. I think they do probably offer higher ceilings than Nix. I think people would agree on that. I talked about Caleb. I talked about May. And I talked about JJ McCarthy as well when I wrote my breakouts column this year that's up at Yahoo that went up a couple weeks ago. And Caleb, again, another guy that I don't know that we need to spend too much time on. We've talked about his situation and what's changed there from last year, the upgrade in coaching, the better offensive line. Like I just said, it might take a little bit of time for everything to gel, even the new pieces, the rookies there, the weapons that he has. But I do think it is going to come together for him. And I will say, like, at the end of last year, after they made that quarterback change or coaching change, he had 3 top 12 fantasy weeks over his last 7 games, right? So he showed that it is in him. It is still there. And you figure with Ben Johnson coming over, he's eventually going to find that and hit that high end upside. May also had a really solid season as things went along. I mean, in the 9 outings where he played at least 85% of the snaps last year, he never finished lower than QB 17. And if you take the averages that he had during those 9 games, you put him over a full season, he would have been right in the low end QB1 conversation for fantasy. So upgraded coaching there, upgraded weapons, another guy that I think you got to feel really good about. And then McCarthy, I mean, the investment in a first round talent, I think, is normally a pretty smart move, especially when it's a guy that had an injury last year, who has a chance now to be around this really great offense, to learn everything, to settle in. It wasn't like he got thrown out there as a rookie last year and, had an opportunity to develop some bad habits or something like that. We've heard about how Kevin O'Connell sat down with him. They've been having these meetings all year long. He's made a really, really smart point to do that and not just kind of leave O'Connell or not leave McCarthy off on his own. So you look at him, and I tweeted this a couple weeks ago. I've seen some other people share some things similar to this since, but QBs under O'Connell in Minnesota, all been really good fantasy options. So Sam Darnold, QB 11 in fantasy points last year, 18.8 per game. Kirk Cousins was the QB 7 in 2023, 19.3 per game. QB 13 in 2022 for Cousins, 18 fantasy points per game. Even Josh Dobbs, when he was a QB 10, averaging 19.1 fantasy points per game during that 5-game stint that he had as a starter with them when Cousins got hurt a couple of years ago. And Nick Mullins, he was the QB 14. He was averaging 17.9 fantasy points per game when he was in there and under center over the final month that year. So McCarthy, in my mind, you have this first round talent. You have great weapons around him. You have a coach that just seems to, any guy that's out there under center puts up decent fantasy stats. The fact that he's going a little bit later than these other guys, I think in hindsight is going to be a mistake. In the long run, I think he's going to get bumped up right where we're seeing Caleb and right where we're seeing Mago and Nix. I think he would be a second round talent. It might just take, 4 weeks into the season, 8 weeks into the season or something before people realize that. If Sam Darnold can do it in this offense, I'm sorry, not to be a Sam Darnold hater, but if Sam Darnold, after the career he had leading up to that point, was able to produce like that, what is McCarthy going to do in this offense? I think he's going to be great. And then I'm not quite as high on Michael Penix Jr. I mean, I think he's more of a pocket passer. I think he's a little less proven. Last year down the stretch when he was in there, even though Drake London was lighting it up, it's not like Penix was putting up these huge games. And I don't think he's really going to give us that rushing, production at any point. So I feel like he's a little bit further back from those guys, but they're all really great values in this draft. I mean, they're all guys that people should be targeting in dynasty startups because I think that class, I'm pretty sure that they are all going to hit and they are all going to be strong NFL quarterbacks for a very long time.
Yeah, it's like hits to some degree, right? And I think obviously this, where they fell in this draft, really kind of perfectly encapsulates that. And you can say you're apologizing for your Sam Darnold, if he did it, then JJ McCarthy can do it. Sam Darnold went in the 11th round in the startup draft. To me, he was my QB3 in the 11th round, which I actually felt okay about him being a QB3 because he's probably going to start the entire season for this team, maybe multiple seasons for this team. It's just okay, you can lock in a multi-year starter and just you're hoping you never have to start him, but maybe he gives you a week in a good matchup or something like that. But that's where Sam Darnold is after that season that he just put up with Kevin O'Connell. The entire industry is saying this was less about Darnold and more about what Kevin O'Connell is giving you. And I don't think you could find anybody out there that's got anything bad to say about the way O'Connell designs offenses, the players that they have locked in there for multiple years. You have the best receiver in football in Justin Jefferson, and you just going back and charting Jefferson pretty recently for RP. It's man, they just do so much to get that guy free, to get him away from. I mean, it's hard to get him away from double coverage and cloud coverage and, too high safeties and stuff like that. But they do a lot to get him free on downfield concepts. And, Sam Darnold, to his credit, was willing and able to take and make those throws. We'll see if JJ McCarthy is that guy. But, I mean, even if he's not I don't know, an elite quarterback or becomes a guy that is a top, pushing for top 10 finishes, in these NFL rankings and stuff like that. If he's merely a good starting quarterback, it's going to be hard for him to fail from a fantasy perspective in this offense. I'm curious to hear more about your Bo Nix thoughts here, because I guess maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I was a little surprised to see him go in the second round in this draft because, again, maybe I shouldn't be surprised because he's a first round pick who was a top 10 quarterback in fantasy last year. He's a top 10 ranked quarterback this year, and he is going into a second NFL season. So on paper, that should scream, no doubt about it, a second round dynasty startup pick in a super flex format. What are maybe we missing here with Nix, or maybe particularly what am I missing here with Nix? Because he's also tied to a great play caller, and he was very, very good in his rookie year.
I mean, I think that's what it is, right? He has some rushing production as well that boosts him up in fantasy and really helped him last season. But I think this is another scenario like McCarthy where people just love this setting. They love the offensive play caller. They love the offensive line he has there. They're starting to build out his weapons. They got him some rookies that came in this season, and even a veteran in J.K. Dobbins, who I think is going to have a pretty good role in that backfield as well. But Pat Bryant at receiver and R.J. Harvey in the backfield, and you go out and get Evan Ingram at tight end, and now his weaponry is much better than it was last year. And when you have faith in the coach and you have that good offensive line in front of him, I think the Broncos are pretty competitive. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make, and I'm trying to, change my approach on this, is I think the pre-draft process for Nix, in my mind, I didn't love him as much as some of these other guys, and he was a little bit older, and I didn't view him on the same level. But for him to come in, produce the way he did, be in this setting where clearly it's going to be fruitful for fantasy, we saw it last year. I think that's where we have to kind of start to switch gears and go, okay, this guy is probably going to be okay. Even if you don't think he's quite as talented, even if he doesn't have the same kind of ceiling that some of these other guys have, like even, Caleb Williams or Drake May, like with the rushing production they could bring too. And with, everything that's around them, I think those guys potentially could vault into that first round next year and be really, really good fantasy quarterbacks for a long time. Nick's maybe more of that guy that's just, going to be okay, never going to have that season where he's a true league winner for you. But a guy that, at the end of the second round, that is where he should go ADP wise. Even though he is a little bit older than a lot of quarterbacks that come out, he's still pretty young, right? So if he's able to do that as a rookie, I think we're going to see something similar this year from him. So why not lock that down in the early rounds and getting him at the end of the second? You always have to think too, like Ray's picking there at the end of the second, like he could have easily taken him early third, and then we'd be called, and Nick's went in the third. He didn't go in the second with those other, like all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think the main takeaway for me is you look at this group of sophomore QBs, and they are guys that you should be investing in for fantasy, for dynasty startups. I mean, Daniel's clearly the elite guy. You could rank the next four of this group in really any order in my mind. I still have Williams at the top as my quarterback two amongst this class. But whether it's Nix, whether it's May, whether it's McCarthy, I think all those guys are going to be good. I don't know that there's a bad option. And when you factor in the cost and where they went in this draft, that's when I start to gravitate towards McCarthy and even potentially towards Penix, who I think could be pretty good for where he went.
Penix could be like a Jared Goff type in my mind,
exactly.
Where when everything else comes around him, and I do think this is it's a pretty well designed and a good offense under Zach Robinson as the OC there in Atlanta. He could give you that kind of fantasy appeal. Like he's never going to be a top three finisher at the position, but just consistent back end like quarterback one production is kind of I think what you're hoping for from Michael Penix. Okay, that was a big deep dive into second year quarterbacks. We are going to take our first break. We come back. We'll talk through two players on the same team and which would you rather have in Dynasty right after this. All right, we are back. As promised, we're going to talk through two guys who went pretty close to each other in this draft, and we're going to debate on who would we rather have in Dynasty. And the fact, Justin Boone, that we are saying Trey McBride or Marvin Harrison Jr., who is the better Dynasty asset right now? I think if we were having this conversation 365 days ago, people might have been tearing us apart in the YouTube comments. You know what I'm saying? Like Marvin Harrison Jr. was pretty much the consensus 1.01. I mean, look, I've said this all throughout draft season that if you liked Neighbors better than Harrison or Adunze I thought was in that same tier, I would not have fought you for a second on it. So like that at the same time though, he generally was the top ranked rookie last year, and I really loved him as a prospect. But the fact that not only are we having this conversation, Boone, but Harrison went, like 4 picks after Trey McBride in our draft. And I don't think that's crazy. It's pretty wild that we've gotten to this point. Where do you stand on this particular debate here?
Well, I think it's also important to bring up, this was not a tight end premium mock either. If anyone's looking at this and going, well, of course it's tight end premium, so that's why you take McBride. It is not. And yet still he went 4 spots higher, right? And I totally agree with you. If we were having this conversation last year, they might have just like midway through the show just canceled us and not let us get back on the air, right? Like they would have thought we were out of our minds. And yet, like you look at it last year, like what McBride did, like he really established himself as a difference maker at tight end for fantasy. He finished just behind George Kittle in terms of fantasy points per game. He was a 0.1 points per game behind Kittle. And, that was with only scoring 2 touchdowns on 111 catches, which is another thing that is just completely insane. And I cannot imagine seeing that happen again. We're going to see some regression there for him. He's going to get in the end zone more. It was so strange last year. Like, even when they were trying to get him a touchdown late in the year, and it still wasn't working out. It was the weirdest scenario. It was like there was a curse against him or something. But 111 catches, from the tight end spot, very few tight ends have that ability or get that kind of volume. So McBride really, really setting himself apart and putting him into that, truly elite category of tight ends with Brock Bowers, who he actually finished ahead of last year by, 0.1, I believe it was as well. And yet still the touchdowns didn't have it and finished ahead of Brock Bowers. Now this year, will that continue? I think it's going to be close. In redraft, I think McBride is probably the smarter pick because you get him at a little cheaper cost and has the same kind of upside, I think, as Bowers does. But you look at these guys, it really comes down to, and I want to hear your take on Harrison. It really comes down to what you think Harrison is going to be. And he was a victim of great expectations last year for sure. We all thought, or at least I did, that he was going to come in and he had the name and he had the family and he had the college stats and he had the draft capital. And it just seemed like a complete slam dunk that this guy was going to come in and have a great NFL career. And yet not every player comes in and does that. Some guys need some time to acclimate themselves to the pros, to figure out how to win at the next level. And maybe that's the case with him. There's also some things, in that offense that I don't think they were necessarily doing him a lot of favors, but 62 catches, 885 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I think a lot of people forget the guy had 8 touchdowns last year as well. So it wasn't like he did nothing as a rookie, just he didn't come in and put up 1,500 yards right away like I think a lot of people expected him to do. I do think one of the biggest problems, though, is the way he's used on that offense. And the question is that going to change this year? We see a great highlight coming out of camp, right? Where he's making this one-handed catch and it's amazing. And yet again, he's running down the sidelines outside of the numbers. He's holding off a defender with one arm and he's catching the ball with the other. That's kind of what it was last year. It's like they expect him just to be so good that he's going to overcome no matter what the defense does. They're not doing anything to really get him these easy shots. Hopefully that changes. Will it change? I don't really know. There's not a ton of changes around him in terms of the personnel, coaching, and all that sort of stuff. So do we think that he could still hit that ceiling? I do think it's still there for him. We see him dedicate himself to the game. I think he's that kind of player where he's living and breathing football. You see the physique change this year, right? He looks a lot different. He's clearly been in the weight room. He wants this. He is going to dedicate himself to get it. And I hope that they give him a little bit of help in terms of the way they call that offense. And I also hope that he could just take the next level in his game as well. But let's hear the reception perception take on Harrison and what that could mean for him versus McBride in Dynasty.
Well, yeah, I obviously want to talk about Harrison, but I think actually starting with McBride is the best way to do this, because I really don't think there's any problem. The question is not really here is Trey McBride, did he go too high or is he overrated in Dynasty? Because I think the quick answer to that's just no. Him as a top of the 3rd round startup pick is totally fair and totally defensible. The question is really just, can Marvin Harrison Jr., can he leap higher than what he was last year? Can he be one of these guys that we're going to get to in the 3rd section of the show, a guy that could be in the 1st round conversation? And I think that's the bigger question, because with McBride, man, the guy, according to Fantasy Points data, the guy had a 33.6% share of the first 3 targets in Arizona last year. That was number 1 among all tight ends. He was the only one over 30%, and it was 10th in the NFL overall. He was just 0.1 percentage off of Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, maybe one of at worst, the 2nd best receiver in the league, maybe the best receiver in football. That, like I said, his offense does a great job to design things for him to get shot plays down the field. That's how dominant Trey McBride was in terms of being a guy that was the first read in the concept. So he is one of these, you and I talk about, oh yeah, we want a tight end to be one of the first 2 targets on his team. But Trey McBride, he locked in one of those top 2 spots, and he was really good and a really efficient and effective producer in that role. So I don't think he's going away. The question is just, can Marvin Harrison make this a situation where, like with the Eagles last year, both of those guys were over 33%. And like, obviously some of this is they missed games, right? AJ Brown missed time. Devontae Smith only played in 13 games, but these were both two guys that were 33% in terms of earning the first read targets there. Whereas Marvin Harrison is the 32nd in the NFL. He's like 27%. Like, he needs to make this we've got two like alpha targeters, which is totally possible because they play two different positions. And I think you're right to hit on a couple of things there. Number one, Marvin Harrison Jr., like he does need to get bigger, faster, stronger. And as you mentioned, like, he looks great. He's gained a little bit of weight. I don't think that means he has to be slow or anything, because when you look at Harrison, like, again, I don't want to retcon the prospect profile for Harrison, but we never got any athletic testing on him. And from a measurements standpoint, he was sub 215 pounds, 47th percentile arm length, 21st percentile hand size. So he wasn't this like Calvin Johnson-esque physical freak. He was really like a souped up version of, like, a bigger version of his father, which was like a craftsman level route runner. And I think you saw that, and that kind of comes back to the usage part of this. So among players I tracked last year, Boone, for like from last season for reception perception, it's very rare that you see guys at or above 80% and outside and on the line of scrimmage players. So those like classic X receivers. A few of the guys that did that: Quentin Johnston, Nico Collins, which, by the way, just shows you what a baller Nico Collins is. And it was that way in 2023 as well. George Pickens, Marvin Harrison Jr., DK Metcalf, Cortland Sutton. And if you go back to 2023, I'll throw a few more names there that were over 80% snaps outside and on the line of scrimmage. Once again, Nico Collins, Rashad Bateman, Devontae Adams, Brandon Ayuk. Again, shows you what a baller Brandon Ayuk was in 2023. And like, that's it. That's the list. It's a very rare and very like old school usage. Like, some of the names I'm throwing out there, like the guy that you take 4th overall in the draft that you want to be like your elite number 1 wide receiver, you don't want him in the Quentin Johnston role. You don't want him in the George Pickens role. You don't want him in the I love Rashad Bateman. You don't want him in the Rashad Bateman role. I mean, Devontae Adams, the Jets like never used him that way. The freaking Packers never used him that way. It was only in kind of like McDaniels's very old school Raiders offense. So it's just, you don't love that. That has to change. But to your question, Boone, like, does it change? Because this team made 0 personnel adjustments on the offensive side of the ball. They didn't add any pass catchers, anything like that, because they needed to hit their defense hard. So what we need to see basically is like, okay, Michael Wilson has to take some like sacrificial X receiver reps away from Marvin Harrison Jr., which I think is possible, because I actually thought it was going to happen last year. Michael Wilson at the end of his rookie season had like 3 games at the end of the year where he played X receiver because Marquise Brown was hurt. And I thought he played pretty well in those moments, but they just never used him like that again. So I don't know. It's one of those things where it's kind of a close your eyes and bet on talent thing with Harrison, and a close your eyes and bet on rational coaching thing with Harrison, because like the quarterback's not going to change. I think Harrison was really good last year and can be even better in isolation this year. So really it's about the usage and just like the ascension of a player, because we're not going to get any sort of signals like, oh yeah, now he's going to be like a 30% slot player or something like that.
All right, so let's get your answer here. If it's McBride versus Harrison, if that was your pick, who would you take?
I mean, I just did all that talking, and you're going to make me answer the hard question. You're going to actually make me answer the question that I asked. How dare you?
I'll buy you some time. I'll be happy to answer it myself. I'm still taking Harrison. I'm still taking the guy that I think does have that upside at receiver. He has the age that we're looking for in a dynasty prospect. When you put all that together, I'm still going to chase that. And a big part of this between these two comes down to it not being tight end premium. Like, if it's tight end premium, it's not even close. We're taking McBride. And I do also wonder if a big part of this just comes down to the touchdowns last year. Like, if McBride ends up scoring 5 touchdowns and he finishes as the number 1 overall tight end, and, is he going in round 1 right now? I think he might be, right? Is he going ahead of Bowers? Probably not, but at worst, he's probably an early 2nd round pick, even in non-tight end premium. Like, I think sometimes those things can really, swing a discussion. I'm still going to chase Harrison. I'm still going to chase that guy that I think can be one of those, receivers that ends up giving you a really good career, even if I'm a little less confident that that's going to happen, or maybe even a lot less confident that he's going to hit that ceiling outcome now. I still think there's a chance, and I still would chase that here versus taking a tight end who's going to be really good. But McBride's like 26, I think. You get some good seasons out of him, a little bit older though. Not quite the young guy that like a Bowers would be, where you look at Bowers and go, man, he's probably going to be around for 10 years in my lineup, just dominating. But McBride is a heck of a player. Both these guys are good players. I think they both deserve to go early in drafts like this, in the third round, maybe even in the late second round. I thought hard about taking Harrison with my pick in the early third round. I passed on him for the safer pick, which I thought was the quarterback. But if I have to pick between these two, I'm giving Harrison the slight edge. I bought you some time. What's your answer now?
Yeah, my answer is going to be Harrison too, so it's fine. The reality is, like with these guys, it's just he checks a lot of boxes in isolation that I want to bet on. As somebody that was like an over 80% success rate versus zone player, was really good against press coverage, 80th percentile in reception perception year one. This is the thing. Like, he doesn't need this role change to be a good player, because he can just be even better in his second season. It's just it will make life a lot easier. And all those players I've just listed off there, you notice that I didn't list off names like any of these second year receivers that we're really excited about, like Neighbors and BTJ. You notice I didn't list like friggin' Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. Like, this is not even AJ Brown. Like, this is not the way that most teams use their number one wide receiver. And I think hopefully we will see that change. I think, like, again, it's like minor clues, but I do think we'll see some changes this year. I'll be a little surprised if he's 80-80 again this year. So I'll go with Harrison as well.
All right. And I have one more thing to add here. I bring up my fantasy strength of schedule matrix a whole bunch. The Cardinals have the 12th easiest fantasy schedule for receivers this year. So you go, okay, that's not bad for Harrison. They have the second easiest tight end fantasy schedule. So if you need another reason to think McBride could have another monster year, maybe actually have a bunch of touchdowns, there you go. Second easiest schedule in the league for McBride this year.
Let's stick at the wide receiver position. Give me one of your favorite wide receiver values in this draft.
Man, I really like Jalen Waddle. He went at 6'11", the end of the sixth round. It's about a round below his dynasty ADP. Like, am I the only one that sees like a path to him being like a very valuable fantasy asset? He's only 26. He turns 27 during the season. Before last year, though, and we have a bunch of last year, he missed some games. Tua obviously missed time, and the offense wasn't anything like itself when Tua was out. Before that, Waddle had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. I think we all looked at him quite differently. So was it his fault last year that there was some injuries to the quarterback position to him? I'm not going to blame him. Before that, those seasons, he was wide receiver 21, wide receiver 13, and wide receiver 15. Those are the first 3 years of his career. A very, very productive fantasy player. I still think Tyreek Hill has something left in the tank. I think you could look at last season for him too and say, okay, there were some, mitigating factors around him that brought down some of his production and some of his metrics. But there are some reasons to think that a decline might be coming for Tyreek Hill. And if it does, Waddle could emerge as the number one receiver on this team. There's a lot of hype coming out of training camp right now that he is one of the stars there, that he's putting up a ton of catches, that he looks really, really good. I really like where Dwayne got him. I think that was a fantastic pick.
Okay, so God, I know we just did a whole nother wide receiver alignment deep dive, but I'm going to ask you to come down this road with me once again, because
let's do it.
I just put up his reception perception profile, went up over the weekend, and I think people would be surprised about this, Boone. Like, I just listed off all those names that were like 80 outside on the line of scrimmage players. Jalen Waddle is pretty damn close, like throughout the course of his time with the Miami Dolphins, and I think people would find that surprising. Right? Because he doesn't profile it. I mean, he's sure as hell is not like Cortland Sutton or DK Metcalf or anything like that. But over the last 3 years, his snaps on the line of scrimmage have been 77.9%, 81.2%, and 82.4%, literally going up every single year. And he's mostly an outside receiver. Like, he was 78.4% snaps outside for reception perception, 2023, 76.6%. He has never taken more than 23% of his sampled snaps in the slot. And I think people would find that surprising because of the type of player he is. But what you got to remember is that this offense in Miami is so condensed. So number one, an X receiver in this offense is different than like an X receiver in a very traditional like spread out offense, because Miami is a little bit weird with just their player alignment. But it's also a very heavy offense. They use a lot of tight ends. They use a fullback. So somebody has to be the on-ball player, and nobody will fault Mike McDaniel for taking Tyreek Hill, one of the most explosive players in NFL history, and making him that layup target guy, the designs, the screens, like full speed motion at the snap. But I have no reason to think that Jalen Waddle can't do that stuff too, based on his skill set. But he just hasn't been the one to do it because it's been going to Tyreek Hill. But you mentioned this, Tyreek Hill, none of these Miami Dolphins had good, good per like route stuff last year. It certainly wasn't as efficient because the offense just wasn't as efficient. Tua missed time, as you mentioned, a lot of chaos. But nevertheless, like Tyreek Hill dropped off from 75.8% success rate versus man in 2023 to 67.3%, a career low, a huge drop. I personally think, and again, that's like isolating all the other variables. I was just focusing on Tyreek Hill. I think the decline has already begun for him. And I just wonder for Mike McDaniel, who are you going to lean into more? The like 31-year-old disgruntled wide receiver who wanted to quit the team in week 18 last year, or like this guy that you signed to a mega contract extension a couple years ago, who I think can do a lot of the same things. And just lastly, like sort of one explanation for the like per route efficiency decline for Waddle beyond all the other environmental stuff. There was two other guys added to kind of the designed target pecking order in this offense with Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane, which some of the Achane screen stuff I actually don't love after going back and watching, but like the plays are good, but it just creates to this overall like Tua getting the ball out in fewer than 2.5 seconds in each of the last 2 years. You know who's never going to get the ball in that instance? The guy that's the outside on the line of scrimmage player. So taking Smith out, I think, should open things up for Waddle. And yeah, man, if there's any sort of the designed stuff for him goes away from Tyreek Hill more to Jalen Waddle, which that's why I have those guys pretty close in my rankings, because I think there's like a chance that happens, but obviously, again, no guarantee.
Yeah, so I think that's a great pick. I think that was a great breakdown by you. I think now it's time that we got to bring up the Josh Downs thing, because like I said, I know it's just a mock. I was totally expecting Downs to fall. I don't know why I thought he would get by you, but in my head, I was ready to make that pick. There's no way he's going to go in the next few picks. And then sure enough, you take him at 808 and I was picking 810. So thank you for that snipe. The funny part is when I messaged you and gave you a hard time, you said, well, I was debating between him and Jaden Reed. And guess what? I ended up taking Jaden Reed 2 picks later. So we ended up with 2 good players. I think these are both guys that we've talked about them before. They have top 20 upside if things eventually go their way. For Reed, that means he's got to play more. I think the talent's there. He's shown he's put up numbers for stretches before, but he's been the number 3 receiver in that offense. We might have gotten a glimmer of hope about that because some of the beat writers are saying that he's being used more in 2 receiver sets in training camp right now. So hopefully that's not just a practice thing. Hopefully somebody wasn't just resting. Hopefully that's a sign of things to come for him, because that could totally unlock him. And then for Downs, it goes back to the Anthony Richardson conversation. Anthony Richardson potentially winning that job is great for Anthony Richardson in fantasy, might not be great for some of the options there. And I think I would be less excited about Downs if Richardson ends up winning this job. I think part of the thing we were, starting to convince ourselves of was with the injury to Richardson, if Daniel Jones gets out there, Daniel Jones, who just absolutely peppered Wan'Dale Robinson in the slot last year in New York, could he do something similar for Downs? Could he be like a more consistent quarterback in terms of like just short throws, intermediate throws, some of the things that like Anthony Richardson, he needs to like sit down with Josh Allen and go over like Josh Allen early in his career. And I say this as a Bills fan, would just wire short passes at guys, like full power rocket balls short, and guys would have trouble catching them. Josh Allen figured it out. Let's hope Anthony Richardson can too. I think Josh Allen is like the extreme ceiling for things working out for him. I doubt we're going to get that at this point, but he has a lot of those Josh Allen traits. So I hope he figures that out for him in real life, but also for Josh Downs here, because if he ends up being the starter, that's going to have a big impact on, what we think of this Downs pick and what we think, of that entire offense.
Yeah, no doubt. Like, I think if you're coping with honestly, it's just way more exciting if Anthony Richardson is the starting quarterback, because it's just, hey, like maybe, okay, then there's a chance that he's going to improve and he's going to be a really, really fun quarterback, because like he would definitely be a more fun quarterback to watch than Daniel Jones. Like honestly, the Daniel Jones stuff felt like a scam, right? It was like we're hoping to scam our way to a Josh Downs like good fantasy season, but I think we want more from that for him. But yeah, the reality is, like if it's Anthony Richardson, like there's probably going to be fewer plays, there's probably going to be more rush attempts overall, and just fewer passing targets to go around for these guys than it would be with Daniel Jones. But there's a chance that if Richardson, like adding Danny Dimes to the mix, has, lit a fire under him, and he has been working with private quarterback trainers in the offseason and stuff like that, the offense is just better. And I think that is something we can also hope for as well. But yeah, on Jayden Reed, I mean, I just always want to bet on really talented players that like we're kind of obsessed over a micro deal. Like Boone, let me ask you this. Am I justified in, like, let me actually phrase it this way. Is it rational for me to understand like the importance of the 2 receiver set thing while also thinking that we've jumped the shark and like oversaturated the importance of it? I mean, the Packers, they run a lot of 11 personnel. Like Jayden Reed's on the field a ton. And like, here's the reality. If he's on the field in 2 receiver sets, he's going to obliterate his ADP this year. He's going to look great as an 8th round dynasty startup pick. So I don't know. Did anything I'd say there just made any sense?
Yes, I think it comes down to, like, in my mind, and I think you might agree, he's the most talented receiver on the team. We'll see what Matthew Golden can do.
Yeah,
he's a first round pick after all, but Reed is a extremely, extremely talented receiver. So to see him kind of not being featured as much as he should be, that might be more of what this is. It's like, okay, you're treating him like the 3rd receiver. He's playing slightly less snaps. Why, when he is the guy who we think has the most talent in that receiving core, and you don't have that true number 1? And I've talked before about how the Bills and the Packers are some of these teams where it seems like they're content just spreading the ball around, and they don't necessarily maybe even want a number 1 receiver. They want to keep defenses guessing week to week. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe LaFleur just doesn't want to feature him all the time. I don't know at this point, but I think it comes more down to the fact that I think he's the most talented guy. Why don't we just get him out there as much as possible? Why are we taking him off the field at all? Why aren't we featuring this guy in the offense more? And hopefully that's going to happen here. And hopefully Golden, with his speed, can maybe clear guys out a little bit more and let Jayden Reed get to work.
Yeah, I think that people know how we feel about Josh Downs and Jayden Reed. So I think it's those are 2 guys I definitely think were good values. They were way above in my rankings. I'll just throw 2 more out there because I did love the kind of run on receivers in rounds 8 to 10, like that were drafted on day 2 this year. But I'll save that for our final segment about rookie drafts. 2 others I'll throw out there, one of which I took, one of which I did not. The one I did not take was Rashid Shaheed in the 12th round. He was Danny Kelly's final pick. I just really like that pick because, like, Rashid Shaheed is a really, really good football player. He'll be 27 in August, late August 31st, actually. He'll turn 27. So it's not as if he's, like, super, super young, although he was a part of that 2022 draft class. He's been super productive. He's a big play threat. It sounds like he's healthy and having a really, really good training camp. As much as we love Chris Olave, who I did take in the 4th round of this startup draft, Rashid Shaheed, the production could be pretty close between those guys if Shaheed is healthy. So I think that was a good value pick. The other one that I took, well, I'm curious where you stand on this player, because this is another guy that I love and am very biased towards. That is Brandon Ayuk, who I took in the 7th round of this startup draft. I know I have Brandon Ayuk ranked higher than sort of like where he goes in startups right now. I love this player. I think he is awesome in terms of like where he goes in Superflex right now, like ADP wise. He's wide receiver 40 according to Dynasty League Football, 97th overall. I felt really comfortable where I took him because, again, I am ranked way higher, way higher than that, because I think he is so good. And in 2023, he was quite literally one of the best receivers in football. I know he's never been there from a fantasy standpoint, but guys that have reached that peak, I will always hope that they could have that like massive fantasy season. But obvious injury concerns, There's been, I don't know, I want to call it some weirdness from like him and the team at different times. Where do you stand on Ayuk, and do you think this was a good pick or a bad pick by me in the 7th round?
It's a good pick, but you're talking to a guy who I think I was the president of the Brandon Ayuk fan club a couple years ago. I was all in on Ayuk.
Well, I don't know, brother. I might have let you be like Secretary of Treasury or something, but we'll have just co-positions in the cabinet. That's fine.
Well, I think that at that time he was on pace to be, in dynasty startups, a guy who should be a first, 2nd round pick, maybe not first. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself there, but a guy who should go in the very early rounds. And yet, since the injury, since the contract issue, there's just been so many negative things. And then you look at what's going to happen this year. And I know you said you don't like to play dynasty like a stock market, but he's a guy who's coming into the season, coming off a serious injury. There's questions that he's probably not going to be ready for week 1. There's questions about whether he's going to be ready for the first half of the season. When he does come back, is he going to be himself? Is he going to have, a bit of a write-off of a year here? I think that's probably likely. And then you look at this next season and you go, okay, where's his value at then? It's probably even lower, I think, right? People will be more down on him. Do the 49ers have other guys step up? Do they trade him away? He goes to a new situation. Like, I know I'm painting like a picture here, but that's kind of what we're looking at. There's so much uncertainty around him now. And as much as I want to remember that player, and as much as I hope that he gets back to that level he was at before, I do have some concerns that he is not going to be that player ever again, that his career has kind of gone in a different direction. He got paid, he had the injury, and it's going to be very difficult for him to get back into a situation where he can be the guy in my mind. He might have to settle for, a number 2 receiver job somewhere. I have some worries, way more worries. I am no longer the president or the secretary or the treasurer, whatever. I'm no longer in the cabinet, I don't think, on Ayuk, but I do still like him, and I hope he can get back there. But I have some serious worries that it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, you don't want to catch the falling knife in any draft. And he could certainly be that guy, honestly, where I caught him in the 7th round, and 365 days from now we do the same exercise and he's like a 10th round pick or something like that, because he just had like a halfway, he came back midway through the season. He wasn't himself when he came back. All those things that you paint out there, those are very, very real outcomes. There's also a chance that this is one of the best offenses in the NFL, that Juwan Jennings is like a nice role player, but I think is a little bit overstated for his contributions based on last year. Ricky Pearsall, who is another guy I really like Ricky Pearsall is somebody I wanted to get in this draft that I did not. He actually went in the same round as Brandon Ayuk, which I think is like totally appropriate, by the way. Like Ayuk could be that, like Ricky Pearsall could be that guy, no question. Just I have Ayuk ranked so much higher, and maybe I need to like investigate that. But regardless, love Ayuk, love Pearsall. Pearsall could break out. And then there's still room for that like X receiver in this offense, and Ayuk comes back, he plays well. And then he might end up looking like a value in the 7th round. I think that your scenario is probably like neither is 100%. I think your scenario might be more likely, which is why I wanted to pose this question to you as somebody that I know is compromised and biased on the Brandon Ayuk situation, which is me. I'm not really taking him in redraft this year, which I also kind of makes me not want to take him in Dynasty this year. But man, I do love this player, and I am just hoping he could get back as soon as possible and just, absolutely get back to that way where he was one of the best receivers in football in 2023. Like I mentioned, I do want to talk through some of those day 2 wide receivers, but we're going to do that on the other side of our break here, in addition to talking about some guys who could be first round picks in future startup drafts right after this. All right, we are back now that I've had a break to collect myself, wipe away my tears after Justin Boone's very, very deserved but very harsh assessment of how Brandon Ayuk's career could go after this. I've collected myself. Let's get back to some positivity here, Boone. For our 5th segment, let's talk about which players have the best path to becoming a first-round dynasty pick in 2026. We've laid out a ton of really good ones already, but let's dive into. Let's start with Drake London, who we talked about earlier. Again, I think this guy has all the talent in the world to do it. We kind of laid all our points out, but he's certainly somebody who went in the back half of the 2nd round here that I could see being a first-round pick a year from now.
Yeah, the age, the production jump last year, the expected volume that we think's coming this season. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see him in the top 5 dynasty wide receivers and to see him sneak into that first round next year. Totally think that's plausible. I also just love this question because I think this is how people should be thinking about those early picks. Like, you want to make sure you're taking guys. Don't take safe picks necessarily. Like, take guys that you think can, blow up and can get into that first round. It does make you lean a little bit more towards the younger guys, but that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that with your early picks. If you want to take some of the veteran players that can fill out those roster spots as you go. But in the early rounds, we want to make sure we're taking guys that have a shot to get up into that first round in future drafts. And in 2026, I certainly think Drake London could get there. I think the guy that went right after him and Ladd McConkey, who we already talked about, I think he can get there. I mean, he's going to turn 24 during the season, but 82 catches, over 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns as a rookie, wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game. And there's a bit more target competition this season, but I expect that he's going to improve on all those marks in year 2. And I assume you're a McConkey guy. I don't know how much we talked about him earlier, but I assume you're a McConkey guy as well, right? Like, he's just phenomenal.
Yeah, phenomenal. He was the best rookie on film last year. That doesn't mean he's going to be the best going forward. But honestly, any of these guys, McConkey, Brian Thomas Jr. obviously could be first round picks. Like, for BTJ, I mean, he is in such a great situation. He was so awesome last year. He was one of the best rookies against press coverage last year, and that like dynamism and multi-layered deployment is going to like all that stuff we talk about, like Marvin Harrison Jr. and the alignment, stuff like that. Brian Thomas Jr. was like 55% snaps on the line last year. Like, they already did a lot of role catered for him last year. Liam Cohen's going to be even better at doing it. So he should be a first rounder. I think Puka Nacua, obviously, like, these guys are just, because this is super flex, they get pushed down, but like, those guys should go in the first round of any typical dynasty startup. I agree with you that Ladd McConkey can get into that territory as well. What about some other guys that maybe were a little bit like third rounders you think could and launch themselves into the first round range here next year?
Well, not to pump your tires, and we talked about him earlier, but Omarion Hampton, right? Omarion Hampton, a great pick, a guy who definitely could come out here out of the gate. We've mentioned the Najee Harris situation before. Najee still on the sidelines, still wearing a hoodie, still wearing sunglasses. We don't know when he's going to come back. And meanwhile, during this time, Omarion Hampton is just showing off to the coaching staff. He's winning their trust. This guy's going to hit the ground running in week 1. He's going to have a huge rookie year. And when you talk about that value game, as soon as he comes out and he's the starter and he gets a big volume of touches in week 1 and he produces in this offense, which we know running backs can produce in this offense. J.K. Dobbins did it last year. We're going to see Hampton, who is a much better running back, get out there and put up big numbers. And when he does, he's going to sneak up right into that range behind the Ashton Genties and the Bijan Robinsons. I think he'll be right in there. I kind of see the way his path could go. At least I thought it was going to be a little more like Jahmyr Gibbs' rookie season. And yet now I wonder if Hampton is just going to be the guy in that Chargers backfield. And Najee's the one who's going to take a total backseat because we don't know when he's going to play and when he's going to be healthy. And he's missed a lot of valuable reps with a new team here. So Hampton, certainly with the age, with the draft capital, and with the situation he went to, it's not hard to see him vaulting up the rankings and getting up in there, into that 1-2 turn potentially.
Yeah. Jim Harbaugh said today on Tuesday that they still don't have a timeline on Najee Harris. So it's just like Hampton's getting all that run. He's going to play in the Hall of Fame game, Boone. I don't know if you know that. So, I mean, remember Josh Jacobs? I was just going to say, tanked him.
Yeah, don't panic when he's the 4th running back that plays in that game. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of all the rookies. Trey Harris is playing. Keandre Lambert-Smith, who, by the way, like, you want to talk about deep dynasty sleeper, Keandre Lambert-Smith is a great name. Chargers, deep threat wide receivers, having a great camp. Like, I feel like I see a crazy ass catch from him every single day on my timeline. So yeah, those guys are all going to play in the Hall of Fame game, which is no surprise. So we'll get a look at those guys here pretty soon, probably for a couple ceremonial reps. But a couple others to throw out here. Obviously, I think the two rookie pass catchers that went in the top 10 this year, Tedero McMillan, I think, could get himself into this conversation if he has a great rookie year, especially if Bryce Young continues that momentum. And look, Travis Hunter went in the 4th round of this startup here. I still have I'm curious where you are with Travis Hunter. Obviously, two-way player. I don't think we've talked about him at all. As a wide receiver prospect, if people didn't follow our draft coverage, I think he reminded me of prime Odell Beckham. Like, that's how good of a wide receiver prospect he was. Now, he still needs to learn some of the finer details of the position, but he's already he's an elite separator, not an elite route runner. I say that a lot with him, but he's special at the catch point. He's rarely goes down on first contact, and a lot of that, like, hey, roll catering stuff we're hoping for Brian Thomas Jr. Travis Hunter is going to get a lot of that stuff too. A dynamic player on screens paired with the best screen play caller from last year. So he is certainly a guy that maybe it would take Boone, the Jaguars scrapping him as a cornerback and just focusing him at wide receiver to get him into the first round range. But talent-wise, he absolutely has the ability to get there.
Yeah, he's probably not going to end up being one of these guys that's going to be a volume monster, right? I don't think that's what he's going to bring, but he's a guy that could catch 4 or 5 balls a game and still just blow up on that amount. Just such an athlete, somebody that I want to bet in, and somebody that when you talk about not just our advice, but our actions, what do we do in dynasty leagues? Any dynasty league where I wasn't in position to take him, I was trading up to try to get him this year in my rookie drafts. I was fortunate enough to maybe make that happen in a couple leagues. Maybe not as many as I'd like, but yeah, he's a guy that I want to be investing in redraft and in dynasty. And I agree with you that he could blow up here. I also think we don't have to go too in depth on this one, but I think all the quarterbacks that we talked about earlier, the sophomore QBs, I mentioned it when we talked about them, but I think all those guys, maybe not Michael Penix, but I think the rest of them could all get themselves up into, that late first round kind of range, with Williams and May potentially having a chance to be mid first round picks or put themselves into the conversation as some like an early round or first round guy, just because of the hype that they have around them and the ceilings that they have. Whereas Nix and McCarthy, you kind of mentioned it before. I don't know that they're going to be top 5, top 7 kind of fantasy quarterbacks, but they're going to be guys that can get into that low end QB1 range and be really solid players for a long time. But we saw May and Caleb going as early as they did. I mean, it's sort of low hanging fruit for me because they were just outside the first round already.
Right. Yeah. A good season by those guys. They'll be launched up into that first round, especially maybe even like getting pretty close, like Patrick Mahomes, who, went in the first round here after a couple disappointing fantasy seasons. We'll see what the Chiefs offense does, but let's transition this thing and finish it up with rookies. So anyone who hasn't had their rookie draft yet, maybe we'll give some undervalued players. Like, who do you think are rookies that are being undervalued by fantasy managers right now? Give me a name here off the top.
Well, I mentioned one earlier. We'll bring him up again. Pat Bryant on the Broncos. I also like Kyle Williams on the Patriots, and I bring them up together because they kind of go in the same range. Like, I have them as second round picks in my rookie rankings. Sometimes they go in that range. They often fall into the third. I'm not sure there's that much difference between their outlooks. Both guys taken in round 3 of the NFL draft. Both guys have a chance to start this year. Both guys are impressing in camp too. And that's not nothing. Like, I always want to hear those reports about rookies, especially that they look like they belong on an NFL field. And they do so far. Right now, long way from transitioning that from just the practice field to an actual regular season game, but you still want to hear that positive buzz about them. And we are hearing that. And, for Williams, Stephon Diggs coming back from a serious knee injury. I know all the reports have been glowing and you see him out there running and everything, but how many times have we seen older receivers, older players come back from serious injuries and maybe they rush back a little too quickly, but they come back, they look okay initially, and then they start to break down as the year goes along? I worry that could be the case for Diggs here. And if that does happen, I think it could really open the door for Kyle Williams to have a pretty big ceiling as a rookie. And then for Brian, I mean, Sean Payton, I don't know why he's been doing this in recent years. Since he's gone to the Broncos, he just wants to compare everybody to like the great Saints players that he had, whether it's Kamara or Jimmy Graham, or in the case of Pat Bryant, he got the Michael Thomas comparison. I'm not really putting too much stock in that, but you look at that passing attack, and Cortland Sutton just got the big new contract, but he's 30 years old this year, right? Like, he's not a young receiver by any means. Behind him, Marvin Mims, they've never really seemed to be that interested in giving Marvin Mims a lot of volume. It seems like he's just been more of like this kind of gadget guy. And I know he had some better games last year, but I don't know that he's ever going to become the player that maybe people hope that he could have become. And Pat Bryant, I think, could step up and eventually emerge as the number 1 receiver in this offense, or at least a very competent number 2. Next to, these old guys that could potentially break down, like Evan Ingram as well. We've seen Ingram get hurt in the past. So I really like Pat Bryant. I think those are bets that I'm really willing to make in the late second round. before I start to get into the running backs that we talked about on a past episode, or some of the tight ends that I'm going to bring up in a second, who I also think are values.
I like both of those names. People that listen to our prospect breakdowns know that I loved Kyle Williams, a guy that, and honestly, I think Diggs can have a good season and be a nice redraft pick, and Williams can still really ascend as a dynasty asset through the season, because I think Tamari Douglas is a nice slot receiver. Like, that's a pretty good 3-receiver set there, because I think the biggest development actually from camp is, obviously Williams playing well and practicing well, but Matt Collins is not practicing like with this team. He was probably, I would say, the guy that could just run out there and be like the sacrificial X receiver. If there's an opening at X receiver, Kyle Williams might not have necessarily the size to do it, but he does have the skills to do it. 82nd percentile success rate versus press coverage and reception perception. I get it. Level of competition pretty different than what he was facing in college going to the NFL, but still the skills, the traits, the abilities are there for him to play at that position, while Diggs, who's always been a flanker, I think can win there, and then Douglas is your slot. Nice little 3-receiver set for the Patriots. And on Pat Bryant, I thought this was pretty interesting. They just rewarded Cortland Sutton, who ran around on 90.5% of the dropbacks last year. Nobody else was above 50%. It was like Cortland Sutton and a bunch of dudes in his orbit. Maybe Pat Bryant files into that orbit as well. Maybe him and Devon Bailey, who had like an okay rookie season, kind of rotate at that big slot receiver position. But what I thought was interesting, Boone, is when you look at Cortland Sutton last year, he was 73rd among wide receivers in yards after catch per reception. Like, obviously, yes, he's a vertical X receiver. You're not going to get a lot of yak in that role, but he's just not a tackle breaker. And he's not a guy that like beats zone coverage over the middle. When you look at Pat Bryant's prospect profile and reception perception, he was a better zone beater than a man beater, and actually was pretty sneaky after the catch. So I think that he makes a lot more sense, Pat Bryant, as a complement to Cortland Sutton than maybe some of those other guys do. Just in terms of that wide receiver room. Like I said, I like all of these picks here. So like Trey Harris is still an interesting pick to me as that maybe X receiver for the Chargers. That like I said, Kyle Williams is awesome there. The one I wanted to highlight, Jack Besh went in the 12th round of this. And by the way, I like both Texans receivers as well. Those are good bets. Like Jalen Noel, I can't quite figure out how he gets on the field if Christian Kirk is healthy and plays well, but like Jalen Noel's so damn good at football. Like I want to bet on him, but Jack Besh in the 12th round, we really jumped the shark on the Jack Besh like mini camp reports where it's like, oh no, Dante Thornton's running as a starter and Trey Tucker's playing over him. Like Jack Besh, all the reports are from camp that he's played a lot better when the pads come on. Oh yeah, probably because they're actually playing football now. That makes sense. The football player is playing better now that they're playing a little bit more football. I think he should have been grouped in with the Harrises, with the Higgins in the 9th round of this draft, as opposed to where he went. I remain a very, very big Jack Besh fan, and him in the 12th round is a crime.
Another thing that I'll bring up with these rookie receivers, especially when you're looking at the ones that are like a little further down the draft board, you want to look at the quarterback they're attached to, right? You want to look at some of these guys, like I mentioned, Kyle Williams, Pat Bryant. They're attached to these young sophomore QBs that we really like, that could be their quarterback for a very long time here. I really like Geno Smith. I still think Geno Smith is so underrated. I think that's good for Jack Besh. So that's another reason to like him. And then obviously Trey Harris being attached to, my guy in Justin Herbert, who I took in the 3rd round there. That's another one where Herbert's going to be around for a long time. So you're going to be able to build that connection. I think they're all really smart picks when you're picking in that range. And I think it's good to point out that I think they're a little bit closer because Trey Harris goes before them almost always. I think they should be a little bit closer to him in sort of that tier than they have been in a lot of, especially rookie drafts that I've done.
Yeah. And same with those Texans receivers, right? Like they're tied to CJ Stroud probably forever, and like I really think I like the way that receiver room can come together with Nico Collins as the alpha, and Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, who I think Higgins is going to get the deployment that he needs in that offense, and also I think will help Nico Collins take fewer snaps on the line of scrimmage going forward. Maybe like imagine a player of Nico Collins' caliber like getting to move around the formation more. Maybe Higgins can help him take some of those reps. So that's like, it's actually kind of impressive that all the guys in this range have pretty decent quarterback situations when you look at sort of those day 2 wide receivers. And that's why it's important to kind of track that group. But Boone, it would not be a Dynasty pod if we didn't get you to go sicko mode here for the people to sign off. So Give us just some sicko names here. There's some tight end depth names you're going to rattle off here.
I mean, these aren't quite sicko, but we'll see how far I go with it. Now, you look at the top two tight ends in this rookie class. You look at Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. Everybody focuses on them. If you can get them, great. If you can't, this is a very deep tight end class. There's a lot of talent. And we could start with Elijah Arroyo on the Seahawks, who they just dropped Noah Fant. They talked all offseason long. There was all the speculation that they could get rid of Fant at any point. He stuck around so long that it seemed like he was going to stay with the team. And then they cut him right before training camp. And now this opens the door for Elijah Arroyo to potentially be the starter in this offense, to be a guy that's going to get some usage. He's a great pass catching tight end. He's somebody that you could look to. Mason Taylor looks like he's going to start for the Jets. Potentially these guys could contribute in year one. We've seen rookie tight ends do this in the last few seasons. So I really like those two. If we go a little bit further down, Harold Fannin Jr., who was just insanely productive in college, he goes to the Browns. He's trapped behind David Njoku, but you look at him in college, they moved him all around the formation. Could the Browns do something similar? Could they move him around the formation and get him out there with David Njoku a bunch, use him as a weapon on the offense? I think they should. I really, really like Harold Fannin, who you can get a little bit later. Terrence Ferguson on the Rams, another guy who's going to be stuck behind Tyler Higbee, who has just been a staple for the Rams. Tyler Higbee getting up there, probably not going to be around much longer. And Ferguson, somebody else who could get out there in two tight end sets. Now, when you have two receivers that are going to command the volume that those Rams receivers do, might be tough for him to have a big fantasy impact in year one unless Higbee gets hurt. But still, somebody that we could be talking about next year as a guy that's almost right up there with where Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland are. Aronde Gadsden on the Chargers, and maybe this is the one where we're going a little more sicko mode, but the Chargers do not have a starting tight end. I like Tyler Conklin. I think he's underrated. Maybe he'll be able to hold off Gadsden this year, but Gadsden is a very strong pass catcher. He's a good athlete. We've already seen some plays, some highlights coming out of camp where Herbert's finding him downfield. If he can emerge this season, we've talked about how other than Ladd McConkey, not really an established number two pass catcher. I like Trey Harris. We just saw Mike Williams retire unexpectedly. So could Gadsden step up and be that de facto number two pass catching option at some point this season for the Chargers? It is certainly possible. So just look at these tight ends in Dynasty. If you're willing to wait, if you don't need them to necessarily be in your lineup right away, you could grab these guys and put them on your bench. And we talk about their value getting much bigger within 12 months. I think all these guys are going to be worth a lot more in Dynasty when we're looking at next offseason and have a chance at least to get out there this year and potentially do something for your team as well.
Totally agree. The one that really stands out to me is Terrence Ferguson, who's a player I really like, and I know Sean McVay is in love with. And like, I was updating my rankings today and just looking like where I compare to consensus. I am like I'm like 16 spots higher than consensus on like both of these guys, like Tyler Higbee and Terrence Ferguson, which it's just like one of those guys is going to hit this year. Okay. Like one of those guys is going to way out kick like 42 and 37 consensus ranking. So I like targeting Terrence Ferguson there because I know this team wants to play a little more 12 personnel going forward. But that is going to do it for this show. Boone, we ran through a ton of topics that people can use for their dynasty drafts, maybe making some trades, altering the rosters, and of course, plenty of things that people can use for their redraft leagues coming up here. Tell the people what you got working on before we see you next on the pod here.
Well, speaking of Dynasty, I'm going to have a Dynasty update to my trade value charts. That'll come out on the weekend. You can go check them out right now. Not a ton of things changing this time of year. So if you go look at the last version, you'll be able to take a look at that. And I say just always use it as a guide. It's supposed to give you an idea of what player values could be. You'll see how they change over time. I always update them at the beginning of every month. I try to update whenever there's big news after that. But they're a valuable tool that you can use when you're trying to craft trades or trying to look at your roster, guys you should be dropping, guys maybe you could pick up at the bottom of the roster and keep that churn going. I also have the full recap of this mock that we've talked about today is up at Yahoo. You can go check that out with my thoughts after every round on what the other teams are doing and also every round with why I picked the guys I picked and how my build was kind of going. I think that could be pretty valuable as well if you're going to do a startup draft. And my redraft rankings rankings, if we want to mention those. They were updated at the start of this week on Monday, and we will keep updating those plenty this time of year as things are changing in training camps.
A lot of things happening for our guy, Justin Boone here. He will be on the show again next week as well, multiple times next week. We are going to be back, though, on Thursday. The great John Daigle is going to join me to talk through the 12 do's and don'ts for drafts this year. Make sure you subscribe to our new YouTube channel. In the meantime, it's we are officially moving over there Monday, August 4th. So, again, this is the very last show on the channel will be the episode with Daigle, and then you can find all the content on the fantasy channel. So make sure you subscribe to that. We will be back on Thursday. Until then, we are out.